Go to have Rabbi Shmuel Wagner with us. So, with all, how you say, with all due, without further ado, Vakasha, go ahead.
Shmuel, why aren't you by the chassan?
What?
Because of this.
Okay. Okay, yalla, Vakasha.
Okay. I'm just going to share my screen. Let me do this.
Maybe make your camera a little bit for your face. You feed the whole face. Okay.
Okay. All right. Shalom Aleichem, everyone. Originally, Mashver asked me to speak about the Rambam, being in honor of the same Rambam. And then he switched it to talk about Gemara. So I was much more interested in talking about the Rambam, but you got to do what you're paid to do. So we'll talk about both. We'll talk about the way the Rambam teaches us how to learn Gemara. Very simple. You sit down in front of a Gemara. You want to learn Gemara, and my Shver wrote about that. This will be for Sai if you're a parent teaching Gemara, Sai if you're a teacher teaching Gemara. This is not a class to teachers. I've done that in other occasions. Baruch Hashem. This is not a class for teachers how to teach Gemara in a classroom. That's a whole different chachma. When you're teaching a whole bunch of kids, we're gonna be much more focused when we get to towards the end, when we get to the practical skills after we introduce it. It's going to be much more focused on when you're learning one-on-one. So whether it's your own child, obviously this could work if you're tutoring as well, because the things that we're going to say are very focused on meeting the student where he's holding individually, and that would obviously be a lot easier if you're dealing with one student. So it's a little bit of a different chachma when it comes to a classroom. Anyways, so you sit down in front of a Gemara, and same thing as if you're learning for yourself. Yeah, same thing as if you're learning for yourself. Once in a while that a Jew opens up a Gemara to learn for themselves. They say, I once heard a story like that. So you sit down to learn a Gemara, and what now? What happens? You want to start a new Masechta, a new parak, a new topic. What do you do? So the answer really will be if we know what Gemara is. And what Gemara is, no one said it better than the Rambam right here. The first thing on the screen right here, this is from the Hakdama to the Rambam that we're all familiar with, right in the first day of the new cycle, where the Rambam goes through the Mesorah of the Shalshal HaMesorah from Matan Torah all the way till him, and obviously majorly stopping on Rabbi Yehuda Nasi writing Mishnayos, and Ravina Ravashi putting together the Gemara, and then post that the Geonim all the way up till his times, till Rambam's times, where he describes why it is what he did. So when the Rambam stops on Ravina Ravashi, yeah, you guys can see the screen, like the computer, the thing.
Yeah.
Okay, so when it comes to Ravina Ravashi, he writes, Ravina Ravashi put together the Gemara. And this was already 100 years after Rabbi Yechon put together Talmud Yerushalmi. Anyways, v'inin shnei Talmudin hu pirush divrei hamishna ubeur amukeiseha. What is Gemara? This is a crucial line. Gemara is you're understanding Mishnayos. You're understanding the depths of Mishnayos. Plus another thing which we're gonna expound, we're gonna understand a little bit better later on. Plus it's all the new things that came up after Rabbi Yehuda Nasi already finished writing Mishnayos, and now it's about whatever it is. I'm not good with history, but 200, 300 years after Rabbi Yehuda Nasi wrote Mishnayos, now is Ravina Ravashi putting together the Gemara. So obviously all the new scenarios and all the new cases and new gzeros that came up after the times of Mishnayos, so obviously that's also going to be included in Gemara. But obviously putting that aside because that didn't exist in Rabbi Yehuda Nasi's time, what is the fundamental idea of what Gemara is? Perush Divrei Mishnah. And what happens is, practically, you see this all the time. When you sit down to learn a Gemara, a new Masechta, a new Perek, so obviously there's the Mishnah, people push a gloss over the Mishnah. they're reading through the Mishnah, first of all, like knowing that they're not going to understand it, because the Mishnah is vague, and that's why we need Gemara. But also, it's a certain mindset that you see very, very common. Where like, yeah, like the Mishnah is just giving us like the talking point, so to speak. But let's get to the Gemara. Hey, we're not learning Mishnayos here. We're not 10-year-olds. We're not learning Mishnayos. We're learning Gemara. So okay, so they printed the Mishnah. So let's read the Mishnah. Let's get through it so we can get to the real Geshmaka stuff. And that's the number one mistake that you failed before you even started. Because Dr. Rambam, very simple. You want to learn Gemara, no problem. You know what Gemara is? Gemara is they're understanding them. They're trying to explain the Mishnah. And the line that I say to bring this out is when you learn Gemara, the best way to do it, and obviously this is a tall order, but the best theoretical way to do it is to become an Amayra. You want to learn Gemara, become an Amayra, right? To think like an Amayra. It's a tagline I use in my class all the time. The boys just should think like Amirayim, and it's actually not as far-fetched as it might sound. What does it mean to be an Amayra? Well, here's the catch. What did the Amirayim learn? The Amirayim didn't learn Gemara, right? The Gemara was written at the end of the Amirayim. What did the Amirayim learn? The Amirayim learned Mishnayos. The Amirayim were sitting around with scrolls of Mishnayos or whatever, Balpeh, Bechsav. There's a beautiful Ha'ar of the Rebbe and Lekutei Sichos that the Pashtos, they didn't have Mishnayos written down. It was for Shas Adchak. Anyways, but the Amirayim are sitting around learning Mishnayos, Balpeh or Bechsav, and they're discussing it. That's what they're learning. And they're discussing it. They're learning it well. They're thinking about what they're saying. They're trying to make heads and tails of every single word, and they understood the preciousness and the diuk, the koyach of the diuk of Rabbi Nasi in every word of Mishnayos. They're learning Mishnayos. That becomes Gemara. When you learn Mishnayos well, then you're learning Gemara. That's what the Rambam says. Gemara is to explain Mishnayos. Gemara is not like another thing divorced, separate from Mishnayos. So you want to learn Gemara, you got to learn Mishnayos. You got to learn Mishnayos. Okay, so that's step one. You want to learn Gemara. What is Gemara? Gemara is, in the words of the Rambam, Peirush Divrei Mishnah. Gemara is explaining the Mishnah. So you have to learn Mishnayos. Okay, so pass the buck. So what's Mishnayos? So if you want to learn Gemara, Gemara is Mishnayos. What's Mishnayos? So this is really where we get into Geshmaka discussion, because what is Mishnayos is not a simple answer. We have to appreciate, and in class when I in school when a little bit of background in case anyone doesn't know, I teach. In Cheder, I've taught for a bunch of years, and from 4th grade, 5th grade, 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade, taught all those grades, Dafka, Mishnayos, Gemara, Scholsa Gemara, and also I put together the curriculum for my school to use for the Scholsa Gemara curriculum in 4th and 5th grade. Now that I don't teach those grades, so when we put together this curriculum, we made a long arichos for the boys to really make sure to understand well what is Mishnayos. I'm not going to go obviously into the whole arichos, but let's focus on one akuda, which is the side over here. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, he lived about 1,500 years after Matan Torah. About 1,500 years. Okay, it's a tremendous amount of time. Just for context, for people who are not naturally gifted in the numbers and timelines and all that, like myself, Rashi, for reference, Rashi lived about 1,000 years. Okay, so imagine saying from you right now back to Rashi. Okay, now that's only 2/3 of the amount of time from Rabbi Yehuda Nasi back to Moshe Rabbeinu, back to Matan Torah. Okay, we're talking about 1,500 years. As we all know, and the Rambam is Meirich, and I'm not going to go into it. Obviously, you have Chumash Torah that's written, and everything else that we know as Yidden is all in that 1,500 years is Baal Peh. Dvarim shebechsav yet Rashi leimer Baal Peh. Dvarim shebal Peh yet Rashi leimer bechsav, or yet Rashi lechoisvan to your size. They're not allowed to write down Torah shebal Peh. Okay. So it's all Baal Peh. They have to learn it from their teachers. That's why they chazer everything 100 times. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, he comes 1,500 years later after the Bayis Rishon and Bayis Sheni and the Zugas and the Tanoim, and he's at the end, and he realizes what we all know, the famous the Mishnah at the end of Masechus Brachos, Eis lasis Hashem efer teresecha. He understands that if Torah Shebal Peh remains like that Baal Peh, and it relies on Messiah, relies on teachers teaching students and students learning from teachers, then the entire Yiddishkeit will get cut off, because all it takes is one generation to not learn properly, and the next generation does not know Yiddishkeit. Pasha doesn't know halacha. Pasha doesn't know how to be mekayim the mitzvahs. So Rabbi Nasi decides to break the rule and to write down Mishnayos. They write down Torah Shebal Peh, and that becomes Mishnayos. Now it's a big machlokes amongst Rishonim and even the Gaonim, but not getting into it. Let's learn like the basic what everyone knows. Rabbi Nasi is the first one in history to do this. Okay, so that's the context. He's the first one in 1,500 years in ever but in 1500 years, no less, to have the task of writing down every single halacha that exists. That's his task. Okay, so again, imagine someone telling you, I want you to do research on every shear that was given on a certain topic from you back to Rashi. Okay, that's only 2/3 of the job that Rabbi Nasi had. Okay, you could argue that no, from us to Rashi, there's much more volume, there's much more material. Fine, whatever. But for the sake of understanding this massive, monumental, historic task that Rabbi Nasi took to write Mishnayos, so he had to obviously have a system. He obviously had to have a seder. He had to have an agenda. He had to have a style. There's no way that this is going to be a hodgepodge job. Rabbi Nasi must have been. We call like the Rebbe Rashab, the Rambam of Chassidus, like for the brilliance of the seder and how he wrote things down. Rabbi Nasi was the chief of all this concept of being a sader, of writing down. In fact, that's what he called his svarim, the Shisha Sidrei Mishnah, because it's all about seder. That's the chidusher, to make a seder out of a Torah Shabbal Peh. And just for points, he didn't have anyone to copy from, right? The Shulchan Aruch is copying the system of the Tur, and the Alter Rebbe's Shulchan Aruch is copying the system of the Simonim from the Shulchan Aruch, obviously, right? But the Rebbe Dasi doesn't have anyone to copy from. There's no previous written sefer to copy. So he must have had a shitta. He must have had a way how to do it. The biggest tragedy, in my opinion, in Torah Shabbal Peh is that Rabbi Yehuda Nasi did not write a hakdama to Mishnayos. I think that if Rabbi Yehuda Nasi wrote a hakdama to Mishnayos, Yiddish Torah Shabbal Peh would look very different the way it looks today. Because as in any good mechaber, what he does in his akdama to his sefer, any given sefer from Rishonim all the way to Achronim, they express what their goal is, what their agenda is in writing their sefer, and how they're going to do it, and how they did it. Not just what resources they used, but also what style they used. A personal example, a very geschmack example. One year, I learned chitas that year with the Pirush of the Sforno in Mekaros Gedolos, and I went through the whole year learning it, and it was very geschmack, whatever, this, that, the other. At the end of the year, I found I realized that he wrote Akdama to a sefer. It's only printed in the big set of Mekaros Gedolos, not in the small set. So maybe I didn't see it, whatever. So at the end of the year, I remember it was Sukkot time, Taka. I sat down and I learned his Akdama. And so long Akdama, he goes through and his perspective of Chumash and of the mitzvahs and of the Seder of Torah, a whole thing, the kavanah of Torah, mamash, a beautiful Akdama. I was so amazed by the Akdama that right away I'm like, oh, I didn't get the whole thing. Everything I learned this year was okay, a nice pirish here, a nice pirish there, but now I see the style, now I see the system, now I see the shitta, but I wanted to learn it again. I never got around to learning it again. But like it's all of a sudden it's like no, I didn't learn it well. I didn't get what I was learning. Same thing in a way. If we would have Akdama from Rabbi Yehuda Nasi himself on what his idea of writing Mishnayos is and how he's going to write it, the way we would learn Mishnayos would be way different. It would be way better. The Ein Arayich. Unfortunately, we don't have Akdama of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi to Mishnayos. But what we do have is the Rambam's Akdama. What we do have is the Rambam's Akdama. Now, there's the Rambam's Akdama to the Yad HaChazakah, to Mishnah Torah, which is the first thing in the cycle that we hold, that every Lubavitcher who learned Rambam at least a few times knows, the Shalshas Messiah. But there's another thing which is not as well known, which is a big crime. It needs to become more well known, which is the Rambam's Hakdama to his Sefer Pirsha Mishnayos. The Rambam wrote, as we all know, a Sefer Pirush Mishnayos. If I remember correctly, he wrote the Pirush Mishnayos before writing the Yad HaChazakah, whatever. But and he goes through the whole Shisha Siddur Mishnah, explaining the Mishnayos unique style, how he does it. Fine. Anyways, so the Rambam writes a lengthy, mamish, a long hakdama to Pirush Mishnayos. Now, generally, it's the same idea as his hakdama to Mishnah Torah, which is that he's going through the Shalshel Samasayra, but he does it way more spelled out, way more barucha. He gets very sidetracked in a lot of different topics as well. A beautiful, a sefer for itself almost. The Rambam's Akdama to Mishnah Torah. So, in fact, here in Karnites, we over the past we have a Gemara share every Wednesday night. I'm coming straight from the Gemara share, and we did one Masechta, and after we finished our first Masechta, before we did the second Masechta, said we have to take a step back and learn. And we spent a few months, maybe even 4 or 5 months on the Rambam's Akdama. Mamsh, a beautiful must read, must learn. So, anyways, in his Hakdama to Pirush Mishnayos, he goes through with a lot more detail what Rabbi Yehuda Nasi's Seder was. In that Hakdama, the Rambam goes through every Masechta by Masechta, why it's in that order. Because again, it's really all about the order. Shisha Sidri Mishnah. And in every, obviously in every Seder, he goes through why it's that Seder and why those 6 topics, the Shisha Sidri Mishnah. And again, with a lot of other topics, it's super geschmack. So the question to think about is, how did the Rambam, so to speak, right? Kilo, we could ask, how did the Rambam know he didn't interview Rabbi Danasi, he didn't have a podcast where he had Rabbi Danasi come in as a guest and tell us what his style was. How the Rambam figured it out, Garba Pashtas, besides the Ruach HaKodesh is because the Rambam learned Gemara. And Gemara is figuring out Mishnayos. So the Rambam Pasha reverse engineered and said, 1 second, if this is what the Gemara is trying to figure out in any given Mishnah, if this is the discussions, the classic discussions, obviously every Mishnah has its own specific sugyas, but there's a certain style, which the Rambam, like any person who learns Gemara well, will be able to figure out at a certain point. There's a certain style to the sugyas. There's a certain agenda that the Gemara will always have. My taima, hechidami, virominu, etc. There's a certain like classic kinds of discussions that will happen in any given Mishnah, so this must be the Yesodis of Mishnayos. So L'chayra, B'Garba Pashas, Rambam Pashas is reverse engineering and figuring out what Mishnayos is all about, based on the Gemara. Okay, that's just an interesting thing to think about, and in a way, like in lieu of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi's Hakdama to Mishnayos, which doesn't exist, we have the Rambam's Hakdama to Mishnayos. In other words, to his Pirush Mishnayos. Okay, so now in that general idea, which again, there's tons to discuss in that Pirush Mishnayos, there's one very fascinating Nakuda that emerges. Fascinating Nakuda. And the way I always explain this is the following scenario. Pashat Pshat, you're going on Mitzvayim. Let's use Rosh Hashanah. You're going on Mitzvah Shofar, you're walking in the street. Excuse me, sir, you're Jewish? Yes, I'm Jewish. Right? Did you hear Shofar today? The guy has no clue what you're talking about. What's your next step? Your next step is, okay, I'm going to blow the shofar and be mechaven to be yotze the shvarm, wait, right? Today's Rosh Hashanah, it's a Jewish holiday, right? Same thing with lulav, right? You're not going to start saying, okay, so when you shake it, obviously you have to punch it on the basics first, right? I'm oversimplifying, I'm over dramatizing this example. Now, to say it not as a silly example, but to say it in real stuff, open up Rambam, Shulchan Aruch, Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, whatever, pretty much any, I don't know what Kitzur, because it's a Kitzur, but open up any sefer of halacha, a properly written sefer on halacha, in any given topic, brachas, Shabbos, Yom Tov, any given topic. What's always the first halacha in that topic? The first halacha in that topic is the mitzvah. Yeah, so Hilchas, Shofar and Rambam and Shulchan Aruch is, I didn't double check it right now, but I remember double checking it when I thought of this idea, is that something to the extent of Chayiv Adam L'Shmoya Kol Shofar B'Echad B'Tishrei, something to that extent. The first halacha in Lula in Sukkah will be Shiva, something like that in Rambam. Shiva Sayomim Shehei Chamisha Asar B'Tishrei, whatever. Chayiv Adam L'Sheves B'Sukkah, whatever the lashon is. Right. The first thing is you give me the mitzvah, then you start telling me the details. This is every sefer of halacha. Obviously, that's how you build up a discussion. That's how you build up an explanation. What's fascinating is it comes to Mishnayos, there's no such thing. Show me any topic, show me any Mishnah, any Masechta, any topic. The first Mishnah in any given topic will not be the mitzvah. And not only the first Mishnah, no Mishnah. There's no Mishnah in Maseches Rosh Hashanah, Chayiv Adam L'Shmoya Kol Shofar B'Rosh Hashanah. There's no Mishnah in Sukkah, Chayiv Adam Lodur or L'Sheves or whatever B'Sukkah. There's no Mishnah in Shabbos, Osir Lo Adam Lasis Malacha B'Shabbos. Right? Another example, right? Open up a Rambam. That's how it starts off. Yeah, mitzvah saseh, to rest, mitzvah. There's no such thing as nice. And fascinating to think about. Rabbi Nasi is the first one. He should, right? Isn't Rabbi Nasi coming to write down the Mishnayos, coming to write down the halachas? I know he's the first, but I would give him enough credit to think of this obvious thing, that the first thing you do, and if not the first, at least the second, the third, but nowhere does it say what the mitzvah is. He goes straight into complicated discussions. Now, there's one detail which maybe people are familiar with, which is there's a famous rule that the Gemara says in many places, which is Tana Milsa de Chaviva Le Nakat Bereisha. The Gemara says in Shabbos, for example, and other Masechtas as well, that we don't see Dafka like starting off with a Chiddush. Right, for example, Masech Shabbos. What does he start with? Arba Yitzil Shabbos, Oni Osher Bifnim Bechutz. Right, any Magachir taught Shabbos knows the Brachim already lost after the first Mishnah. Right, it's complicated. The whole thing, four cases of Yitzia, Akira Hanocha, right? So the Gemara discusses it right away. That ton of Milsa Dechivile Naka Peresha, that whatever whole Vart, not to go into now, but because Malacha of Hoitza specifically is the most of a Chiddush of a Malacha, therefore the Rabbi Nossi wants to start off Dafka with that. So it's there's an Indian of Rabbi Nossi wants to start off with the Kunz. So that's a known thing in Mishnayos. The Gemara says this rule in a few places about Mishnayos. Fine, I get that. I'm not saying that Rabbi Nossi needs to work in an order. Anyone who learns Mishnayos knows that there's no order in Mishnayos. It's not a very structured Mishnah. That's not what I'm talking about right now. I'm talking about that nowhere, not the first Mishnah, not the middle Mishnah, not the last Mishnah, does it ever tell you the mitzvah of what the mission of what that halacha is. Not only that, by the way, just one example. Not Mishnah, what I'm doing right now. I'm teaching now Makis Perek Beis, Eluin Agoylin, right? The halacha of your miklat. The first Mishnah starts off Eluin Agoylin Hahayirig Nefesh B'Shgaga, right? Who goes to your miklat? Someone who kills b'shaygig. And then the Mishnah continues the whole thing, a rule of derech yirida versus derech aliyah. Not to get into it. The Mefarshim will ask, what's pshat? Elin agon harik nefesh b'shgaga. Da pshita. It's a clear pasuk. Understand? This is what we're talking about. When you see those kind of questions, in this case, not from the Gemara, it's from the Rishonim, fine. But when you see these kind of questions, you start realizing, yeah, there's a rule here, and all of a sudden you start realizing, yes, this is true in old Masechtas. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi will not tell you what it says clearly in Torah. And that's why the Rishonim will learn a diok, a geshmak vart, what really the Mishnah means when it says Elin Agon. Again, just one example off the top of my head because that's what I'm learning now. But the same thing is, this is the rule. The rule is Rabbi Nossi does not teach you the basic mitzvah in Torah. He'll tell you all the halachas, all the all the details of the mitzvah, but not the mitzvah itself. Why? In Graba Isis, Rabbi Nossi expects you to learn Chumash. That's it. Rabbi Nossi expects you to learn Chumash. Theoretically, any halacha sefer, you could get away with not having learned Chumash. The Rambam Taka says that a person could read Chumash and then read my Sefer and doesn't need anything else. But in a way, the Rambam was being generous because in a way, to know mitzvahs, you don't even need to learn Chumash. You could just learn Rambam and you know all the mitzvahs because the Rambam tells you all the psukim that are negeh for the mitzvah. So the Rambam just being generous and saying they should also learn Chumash. Fine. But Rabbi Nossi does not do that. But Feirish not. And two things. Number one, well, really one thing. The Nakuda is that Rabbi Nossi was not writing a sefer of halacha. He was not. And historically, what we know why he wrote Mishnayos, it's true. He wasn't coming to write a comprehensive sefer, a Shulchan Aruch, so to speak, of how a Jew should follow Torah. No, he was coming to write down drushes. He was coming to write down Torah Shebal Peh. He was coming to write down the things that are not clear in Chumash. So anything that is clear in Chumash, he doesn't need to write. Now he doesn't need to write, doesn't want to write. So that's a very important rule because all of a sudden, remember, we're on a journey here. You sat down to learn Gemara. What's Gemara? Gemara is explaining Mishnayos. What's Mishnayos? Mishnayos is explaining, or if you want to say it's a addendum, it's a hisofa to Chumash. You can't learn Gemara if you didn't properly learn Mishnayos. You can't learn Mishnayos if you didn't properly learn Chumash. Now, all of a sudden, I'm saying this ki'u is a massive chiddush. This is the clear Mishnah in Pirkei Avos. Ben Chamish leMikra, Ben Esrei leMishnah, Ben Chamesh Esrei leGemara. You need to learn 5 years of Tanakh to be bucking Tanakh. 5 years of Mishnayos, Pashal Girsa to be bucking the halachas, and then you start Gemara, which means the thinking. Now, I'm not going into that. We don't do it nowadays, and this is not a chiddush of nowadays. It's already Dr. Rebbe talks about this. I'm not going into that sugi of when it changed and why it changed. It's not what I'm going into. But one thing for sure, for whatever reason, we don't do it like that anymore. We don't become bucking Tanakh for 5 years and only that. In Eretz Yisrael, there are a few yeshivas that do it, not Chabad yeshivas. There's the Darchei Alimut that still do it. But generally speaking, we don't do it like that. And I'm not here to make a revolution that we should start doing that. No way. But one thing, yes, you don't have to be bucking the whole Tanakh to learn Mishnayos. You don't need to be bucking the whole Mishnayos from Gemara. But in the topic that you're learning, you want to learn Gemara Makis, you want to learn Gemara Zvachim, whatever, you need to be bucky in the Mishnayos in the Mishnayos of Makis. And in order to be bucky in the Mishnayos of Makis, you need to be bucky in the Psukim of Makis, or whatever, of any given topic. This is the first yisoid. The first yisoid is that this is the way how to learn Gemara. You don't start learning Gemara from learning Gemara. You start learning Gemara from learning Mishnayos, and you start learning Mishnayos from learning Chumash. Again, in that given topic. So, for example, in traditionally, we start off learning Gemara from El Metzias, as is the Messiah. So El Metzias is Hilchos Shabbos Aveda. So Shabbos Aveda, there's one pasuk in Parashas Mishpatim, last week's Parashat Taka. And then there's 3 psukim in Parshas Kiseitze, because B'derech Klah, that's what happens. Mishnah Torah, Moshe Rabbeinu repeats the mitzvahs with more details. Now, stam aside point, fascinating point for anyone who knows El Metzias or wants to know El Metzias, nowhere in the entire parak of Gemara does it discuss that pasuk from Parshas Mishpatim. There's no drashas in that pasuk from Parshas Mishpatim. And if you're going to fact check me and tell me that there is, yes, there is one, but it's not about the Shavas Aveda. We use the pasuk of Shavas Aveda to learn out of the Lach of Priko Te'ina in the end of the parak of Shavas Aveda. But other than that, one time where the pasuk of Mishpatim comes in as a side point, nowhere in the parak does it explain that pasuk of Mishpatim. In other words, you could get away with not knowing that pasuk of Mishpatim. But the entire parak is discussing drashas and details on the 3 psukim Parshas Kiseitze, 3 psukim. So what we do in the curriculum of Achana Gemara, we spend weeks on learning those 3 psukim well. That's the first step. The boys learn in not a Chumash class, in Gemara class, in the Gemara time of the day. They learn those 3 psukim well, very well. Be'iyun means you think about it. You're dissecting every pasuk, every word. You're dissecting the style. Obviously, the teacher is leading them. The teacher is coaching them. And obviously, I reverse engineer it. I see what the Gemara is going to say from the Mishnah, what the Mishnah says from the pasuk. So then we could reverse engineer and see what we need to know in those psukim. Then they spend learning the Mishnah, the parak of Mishnayos of El Metzias, parak Beis of Bava Metzia. Now, the truth is that you don't need to be booking the entire perek to be able to start the first sugi of Gemara. That's true, but you do need to be bucky. You do need to have clear the perek of is 11 mishnahs. It's a larger perek. You do need to have clear the first 6 mishnahs for sure. The first 6 mishnahs are basic. Once we're doing the first 6 mishnahs, we make a man shleimus in and we do the whole perek. And it gives them, it's not random topics. It gives them a much better, wider understanding of Shavas Aveda. After they finish the whole parak of Mishnayos, which takes a few months, again, because we're learning Mishnayos Be'iyun, and they're already picking up on half the questions of the Gemaras, and they're already picking up on many of the sugyas, like the smaller sugyas. We're doing it already outside while in the Mishnah, because you can't learn the Mishnayos without learning the Gemara, if you're learning Mishnayos well, because that is Gemara. Then they go back to the beginning of the parak, then we go back to the beginning of the parak, and we start the parak al Seder. And we don't do it so thoroughly every single year, obviously. Like, let's say now in Makis in 8th grade, so we don't spend a few weeks on the psukim. We just read the psukim quickly in the beginning of the parak, and well enough to get a basic understanding of the psukim, and then we go through the Mishnayos, right? Again, just what's necessary to know. So the teacher has to do that research himself and understand himself what's necessary. And we're going to talk about that in a moment when we get a little more to the practical side of things. But this is the Yisoid. The aside is that this is how Gemara works. This is what it means to learn Gemara. It means to learn Gemara is to learn Mishnayos, and what it means to learn Mishnayos is to learn Chumash. In fact, the big thing in the school that we made for this is what we call the pyramid. Right? You guys can see it's like a picture on the board. Yeah. So we call this the pyramid. The pyramid. This hangs in the first year of learning Gemara. It's like drilled in, and then we put like a picture of it in the rest of the classes. The pyramid. You don't Gemara's on the top. You don't get to Gemara. You don't start with Gemara. You get to Gemara by learning Mishnayos Chumash. Aderech Hatzachos, we know the famous vart that the Chaimer of Ulveinim, right? So Alter Rebbe teaches the Chaimer, the Kal V'Chaimer, Ulveinim, the Liban Huchsa. The Alter Rebbe uses the idea of the Avedis Perach Mitzrayim and applies it to what it would mean in learning Torah. So Yeshleimar, this is the pyramid of learning of the Jews built the pyramids in Egypt. This is what it means to build the pyramids in learning. The Chaimer, the Kal V'Chaimer, the Liban Huchsa. The pyramid is the pyramid of Gemara Mishnayos Chumash or Chumash Mishnayos Gemara. Fine. So that's the Yisoid. That's the Yisoid in theory, in philosophy. What does that look like practically? So what that looks like practically is as follows. There's really 2 discussions now. There's a discussion about Mishnayos and there's a discussion about Gemara. The discussion about learning Mishnayos and the discussion about learning Gemara. And again, really, these are independent topics, which means you could have a person who's teaching Mishnayos to his child or, tutoring Mishnayos. Technically also, same thing would apply to teaching Mishnayos in a classroom. Even if it's not Liman learning Gemara, even if it's in younger grades where you're learning Mishnah itself, Mishnayos. Theoretically, it's the exact same thing. And then there's the learning the Gemara. So there are things that overlap. We'll start with those things that apply to both the same. And then if we have time, we'll divide it into a specific thing when it comes to Mishnayos and specific thing when it comes to learning Gemara. So when it comes to learning, when it comes to anything, and the truth is, it's not just Mishnayos and Gemara, it's any topic you're ever learning. It could be halacha also. Based on this yisoid of the pyramid, the same thing exists, not just globally when you're coming to learn Gemara and globally when you're coming to learn Mishnayos, but the same thing exists in any given Mishnah or Sugya that you're learning, which is the Vart of the pyramid, which is the Vart of background information. The Vart of, if I'm teaching this Mishnah, what do I need to know before I know this Mishnah? Okay, so I need to know how to read Aleph Beis, right? And I need to have washed Negel Wasser and said Birchas HaTorah, right? What other ideas do I need to know before learning this given Mishnah, this given Sugya, this Taz, this Pasuk and Navi? This applies to anything. It's a Pashto Vart, but let's spell it out. So for example, um, let's put up this. Okay, I'm not going to go Baruch into this, but I once prepared a presentation about this for teachers. So I gave them like a list of thing of like a few Mishnahs and classic Masechtas that are learned early on in school, and third, fourth grade. Yuma, Sukkah, Brachas, Megillah, Shana. I gave them like classic Mishnahs, and you look at any one of these Mishnahs and like you're going to sit down to teach this Mishnah, right? Let's take the smallest one just for the sake of time. Let's take the brachis one. Par Gimel Mishnah Gimel. Noshim vadim uktanim ptur mikrishma etfil mechiyav mitfil mezuzah berchsa mazon. Simple Mishnah, right? And you're an adult, you're reading the Mishnah. Simple, easy Mishnah. Noshim vadim uktanim. They don't have to say krishma. They don't have to put on film, but they do have to daven. They do have to have a mezuzah in their house. They do have to bench. Simple thing. Do you realize how much information is in that Mishnah? Especially when you're teaching a third grader, a fourth grader, but even a little bit more advanced. You know how much information is in that Mishnah? I need to know what a Eved is. Which Eved are we talking about, by the way? Talking about Eved Knani, or we're talking about an Eved Ivri, right? And it's not. I'm not going to put anyone on the spot to guess, right? We're not talking about an Eved Ivri because an Eved Ivri is a regular yid for all halachas. Anytime you're learning halachas of avodim, it's avodim knanim, right? Ktanim. What age is ktanim? Now that one's a little easy. People know that bar mitzvah, bas mitzvah, fine, right? So determine Kriyashma, you have to know what Kriyashma is. Again, that's easy. Most people know what Kriyashma is. Tefillin, you have to know what tefillin is. Again, that's easy. You know what tefillin are. Chayavim b'tefillah, b'mzuzah, right? Birchsa mazon, you have to know what all those things are. So again, this is an easier Mishnah. There's other examples. But then there's a step further, right? So let's say you taught that and and even on the third grade, fourth grade level, and they got all that. Now, what's a little bit more advanced? Why? Right? Why? That's an obvious question, especially when you're teaching kids. Kids are going to ask you why. So what are you going to answer? Right? You're going to say, oh, because the Mrs. is on grandma. Duh. Right? What does that mean? So the difference between teaching something metento mitfis, the difference of teaching something just normally, is understanding what's necessary to know in order to understand any given Mishnah. So there's a difference, and again, for teachers, I have a whole thing about this, that there's musagim that you need to teach before, there's musagim that you teach after, whatever. But the point is that like there's other information in this Mishnah other than just the words and taichin of the Mishnah, right? And the same thing, mamish, in any of these Mishnahs and any Mishnah, any Gemara, and anything. So that's the first thing. And now I want to say this, especially when it comes to Gemara. I'm going to actually skip to that, even if we don't get to the Mishnah's part of it, because officially it's about Gemara. When it comes to Gemara, it's especially like that because in Gemara, the whole vart of a sugya, the whole vart of shakla v'tarya, as opposed to just basic dinim like in Mishnayos, is that it's a buildup. There was a kasha, then there's an answer. In order to understand the answer, you have to understand this the musag that the hocha b'mayaskinon that came in, and then the Gemara is going to give you a stira from two missions. You have to understand the context of each mishnah. In Gemara, especially, there's so much background information to be able to learn something properly, and definitely to be able to teach something properly. And again, I'm not talking about on the classroom level; it's way more complicated. But even one-on-one, when you're tutoring a kid, when you're learning with your own child, it's to understand, have a grunting understanding of what needs to be understood. Again, especially when it comes to Mishnayos, Rabbi Nasi is definitely expecting you to know Yesoidus from Chumash, from Torah Shebechsav, that are not going to be spoken about in Mishnayos at all. Even when it comes to Gemara, which is going to be a little bit more generous and giving you some of the background information, there's definitely going to be things, by definition, there's going to be things that are necessary to understand. As the Frierdiker Rebbe talks about this concept when he talks about learning Chassidus, but he gives an example from learning Nigla that everything goes minakal lakaved. Everything is in English a pyramid. You have to first have a kal. You first have to understand the bottom steps before you go on to the later steps. So the job of the teacher, the job of the tutor or whatever it is, of the parent, is for themselves to understand, to have a clear understanding of what are these concepts that need to be known before. Fine. So that's one very simple but very important and usually overlooked step, right? The classic example that's just used always for examples, especially when it comes to Gemara, is right. You're learning, and again, We know the Gemara, the word Mesechta means woven, right? That's what we're mesech, right? In Lamtas Malachis. Why? Because every topic in Mishnah and Gemara is woven from other topics. There's no such thing that you're learning you're learning brachas, so you're only going to learn about brachas. No way. Within two daf, you're going to talk about tumatara, you're going to talk about karbonis, you're going to talk about everything. That's in any Mishnah and any Gemara. Especially Gemara. So it happens all the time. It's classic, like kind of example where, like, you're learning a thing in Sukkah, chveisvas, and all of a sudden comes up a stira from a Mishnah, and the topic in that Mishnah is about a migoy. So all of a sudden you're deep into the sugya already, and now all of a sudden you have to start explaining what a migoy is. For a kid, again, for someone who learned what a migoy is, he knows what a migoy is. For a kid who never heard of a migoy, you know how complicated that is? You know how abstract that is? And the kids right away can have 30 questions. What? So I could go to my principal and tell him that because I could have said this, therefore you have to believe me in that, right? The concept of migoy is a wild concept, but it's such a basic concept and it comes up so often. And for because it's basic, like we like, oh yeah, migoy, So you're deep in the sugya. You're like, you had that, like, oh, finally I got the kid to understand this Mishnah, and now like we're asking a steer from a different Mishnah, and all of a sudden, boom, I have to explain about a migoy. So if you did your proper homework and you thought about this kind of idea before you started teaching, you would start off randomly teaching about a migoy. Before you start anything, let me explain to you what a migoy is. New concept. And explain to me what a migoy is. And explain to me, answer those questions. Everything's fine. Then you start the Gemara, which now we're not talking about migoy anymore. We're talking about our Mishnah in Sukkah, and then it comes a question from a thing because of a migoy. You know what a migoy is. So right away we could go straight into the flow of the sugya. It's a game changer. It's a game changer for the boys, for the students, for the child's clarity in what's going on in the sugya. All of a sudden, there's a seder, there's an order, there's a menakal, a kovid, and I understand what's going on. Instead of I still have to remember that question from the Mishnah from Sukkah, and now I have to know what a migoy is. And it takes practice, and it takes thinking, and it takes planning and preparing of what you need to teach before and what the kid needs to know before. But you do this, is mamash a game changer of clarity. So that's definitely the punchline. That's definitely the main nakuda of what we're speaking about here. The concept of the pyramid, the concept of building up, in a kala kaved. So just to finish off, there's one more unique thing about Mishnah, but we're not going to have time for that. Let's focus on one thing about Gemara, and again, to wrap it up, Dafka from the Rambam. The Rambam gave us a very geshmaka clarity, and again, let's go back to his hakdama to Pirush Mishnayos. Not his hakdama to Mishnah Torah, his hakdama to Pirush Mishnayos. So over there, and again, it's more barucha here. So over there, when he talks about Gemara, the Ravina and Rav Ashi writing the Gemara. So let's read this little shtickle a little quickly. The Rambam says, what's the goal, kavana? What's the goal? What's the intention of Gemara? So he says 4 things. There are 4 goals of Gemara. This is going to be massive when you think about this. Pashta things that anyone who ever learned Gemara in their life will say, oh yeah, of course. But when you have this clarity that there are 4 goals of Gemara, we'll see how that clarity can mamish help you in teaching Gemara or learning Gemara. Ha'echad, Pirush Mishnah. The first one is, like we saw before from the Rambam's Mishnah Torah, explaining the Mishnah. V'chol ma she'nafal ba midvar ma'mechilim minyonim rabim mimachloikes ha'pirushim v'tainis kol mefarsh ha'chaveiroi v'gil tanas emes. I'm not going to touch every word on it, but everything that's not clear in the Mishnah, everything that there's a machlokes in the Mishnah, there's 2 ways to understand the Mishnah. Now each opinion has to argue with the other, each Amayra has to argue with the other Amayra about what the Mishnah means. Fine, so that's all, and it can be massive sugyas with Toshmaz and Esaves and back and forth, but this is all the first goal of Gemara to explain Mishnahs. Vasheni, the second goal, Psakadin, Adasa Echad Mishnah Echolkim Shenechelku Bidivri Mishnah, Oy B'Peirusha, Oy B'Chedushim Shenischat Shruvan Shechibra Leha. Whenever you have a machlokes in the Mishnah, or it could be a machlokes of Amiroim in how to explain the Mishnah, we need a psak din. So that's the second goal of Gemara. Usually these are much shorter sugyas. Itmar, the Hilchas, Rav Nachman says lachas like him, and Rav Yehuda says lachas like him. Or sometimes the Hilchasa, whatever, right? So usually these are short one-liners or sometimes 2-liners, but this is a whole new kavanah. This is not explaining the Mishnah. To explain the Mishnah, we could leave off the machlokes, but no, the Gemara also wants to go into halacha a little bit. Okay. Ashlishi, b'chidushi ha'inyanim she'itziu chachmei kodar min Mishnah, v'gilui ha'ikar v'arais she'oheru ben v'samchlei natunem d'armon the Mishnah, fine, etc. Point is, these are the things that only came up after the Mishnah, and the Rambam references very shortly before we saw in the Zakdama to Mishnah Torah. These are the things that are not explaining the Mishnah because the Mishnah didn't talk about this b'chlal. Usually, this is again just to have this clarity. All of a sudden, it'll make sense. This is when a sugya will start off Amri or Itmar. Amri and Itmar are both lushonis of Amiroyim, same shayresh. Amri means when all Amiroyim together are saying one din. Itmar is when it's a machlokes Amiroyim. But this is a whole new vart. Itmar or Amri is when we have a new din. It doesn't say in the Mishnah. Fine. Many times they develop into longer sugyas where we're going to try to slug up from a Mishnah, make a deal. But the pashut is that this is something that's not in the Mishnah. The Amiroyim need a paskin. The Amiroyim were Dayanim, were the leaders of their generations, and they had to paskin the halachis. So they had to make up whatever. They had to come up with new halachis, new scenarios. So that's the third kavana of Gemara. The fourth category is what we call a gadita. Now, again, it's a very geschmack in here. The Rambam is mayrich now, pages and pages, beautiful stuff about the importance of a gadita in Emunah. In Emunah, a beautiful thing. I learned it with my class every year in 8th grade when we do before we do an gadita piece, because the Rambam talks about how people laugh off of a gadita and mock it and say it's silly, it doesn't make sense. And the Rambam gives like beautiful, like mamish, very blunt, very sharp expressions about how foolish these people are who think that a gadita is foolish, whatever. So the Rambam is mayrich now in what a gadita is and why it's so important. Anyways, the point is a gadita. So you learn this shtickle in the Rambam over here in Talmud to Pirshim Shnayis, and you're like, oh, okay, that's interesting. And like again, if you're a student of Gemara, you learn Gemara in your life, you're like, yeah, that makes sense, right, Taka, yeah, these are the 4 types of sugyas. But imagine having that clarity going in to teach Gemara. Imagine having that clarity where I will teach a sugya and I don't have to say it in the beginning necessarily, but as a teacher, I have the clarity what this sugya is coming to do. Where did this sugya come from? What did we just learn before? What did we just learn after? I'll add on my own 2 cents. If you think about these 4 things, what will usually happen in any given sugya, any given Mishnah, is that the first sugyas will be like, let's say I have a Mishnah, then like 5 blot of Gemara. The first thing will be is to explain anything that was not clear in the Mishnah. So all the Hechidamis and all the Viraminhus and all the Maitaimas. And again, this was a last piece that we're not going to have time for now about the structure of a Mishnah. But all those kind of questions on the Mishnah, those will be first. Then will come the Itmars. Then we'll call them the Amris. Then will come the Tonu Rabbanans, right, which are bringing in Brises and Teseftis and Memris from Amiroyim, which are like what I call beyond the Mishnah. So think it's a Pashta Zach. There's a Seder over here. First, we need to understand the Mishnah, then we could advance from the Mishnah. So that will be the Seder in any given sugyas. So another thing, what we did in the school was we made this poster. You can see on the board, and that's the last thing we'll finish with this. We made this poster, and we have it in all the classroom, in the older grades. So simple. 4 types of sugyas. The Rambam writes are 4 objectives to Gemara, and the maskana that we're coming up based on that is, therefore, every sugya of Gemara will be one of these 4. Either it'll be explaining the Mishnah, or it'll be finalizing the halacha and machlekes, or it'll be what I call beyond the Mishnah, or it'll be explaining psukim, which is what we call a gadita, which is not lefi halacha. It's any explaining psukim is not lefi halacha. So when you have this clarity, when the boys have this clarity, just today, mamish just today, and when I teach this year's 8th grade Gemara, 8th grade and 6th grade Gemara, mamish just today, or maybe it was yesterday, I don't remember anymore. Either yesterday or today, in 6th grade, we were learning a sugya, and I pointed to this sign on the wall. I don't point to it every day, but it came up because we started a new sugya, and the boys we were 10 lines into the sugya, and all of a sudden 2 boys piped up. Where did this sugya? What does it have to do with anything? And it's talking next in question because in that sugya the Mefarshim struggle with how it comes in a kindness. But the point was, I said, yeah, excellent. So I said, 1 second, you're asking me now. What about the last sugya? Where did that come from? And it came into a discussion. Was the last sugya tried, right? And one boy asked, what about sugya, the sugya before, sugya base, what after? And I explained to him how that was connected to the Mishnah. I wasn't explaining the Mishnah, but it was beyond the Mishnah. That we use this post as reference. The boys understand this way of thinking, that the sugyas aren't just random mumble jumble. There's a beginning, there's an end, there's a goal, there's an objective, there's a kavan on the words of the Rambam. Anyways, it all boils down to one akud of having clarity for yourself, of having clarity to give it over. Where do you get this clarity? The clarity comes from Pashat, obviously exposure. You're learning more Gemara, but it's about using these kind of tools like the Rambam, who show us, who did the work for us, who did the heavy lifting for us, and they teach us how to learn. They teach us how to teach. Again, specifically, like saying the Rambam's Aktama, V'chulu, these different kind of things. Practically, just to end up practically, if anyone's teaching Gemara, this is why you need to use an art scroll, you need to use a Masifta. Doesn't matter how brilliant you are. The art scroll or the Masifta, English, Hebrew, whatever it is, they'll tell you in the beginning of every sugya or the beginning of every parak, they'll tell you what you need to know. They'll give you all the psukim. And that's in Gemara. In Mishnayos, I would suggest this set. It's in English. I'm sure there's a Hebrew counterpart, but it's art scrolls a few different types of sets for Mishnayos. This one is the best because it's the most concise, but it has everything you need to know. So the same thing in any given Mishnah, it'll tell you everything you know before the Mishnah. Any Muslim that comes up, there'll be a footnote. I was laughing with my friends because we were learning a sugya and we were using the art scroll and it mentioned tefillin, and then the footnote, the art scroll explained what tefillin is. So we were laughing like, yeah, these people using art scroll, learning daf yomi or whatever, but not necessarily they put on tefillin. So it's a funny joke, but the truth is they're right. They're right. You can never take anything for granted. You have to know what tefillin are. And you have to make sure that the student knows what tefillin are. So you don't have to tell them. Ask him, do you know what tefillin are? And the kid could say, he knows what tefillin are. Then you go further. But they actually, I can appreciate what they did. Yeah, even something tefillin, don't take for granted that the guy knows what it is. Fine. Anyways, l'chaim, the ikar is that we should koch in Rambam, koch in Gemara, koch in everything, and Mashiach now.
Thank you. Thank you very much. 1 second. Heshi wants to add something.
Yahadus, with the chidon, where the boys learn, the girls learn, it's actually structured exactly the way you're explaining. You have the psukim and chumash, the aseh and the leis aseh, and then they go through the halachas and they expand on it, and with stories and with final halachas, and they go through kol kula. So
yeah,
this
is how to make.
By the way, I would suggest that you should put it in your curriculum. You should put it in your curriculum. No, Reb Shmuel, you're a man who writes curriculums. I think the yeshivas should learn it pashut in class, because if in 1 year you could go through kol kula, because you learn 5 years of chumash, and from beginning to end, I'm not sure if the kids remember of everything they learned in chumash. They don't. And in the Sefer, no, seriously, you looked in Sefer Yadus? You looked in those as well?
When I'm saying I'm very close with the people over there in Chidon and Yadus, that when they made this books, they made it for schools to use as curriculum. Besides for Chidon, that's why they called it Yadus. They wanted what?
So what happened?
I'm sure there are some schools that do, and I'm sure there are some schools that do, especially
like
smaller schools.
You just gave a whole share. How
yeah. No, there's a different.
Have to learn foundational skills of how.
There's a famous. No. When it comes to Chidon specifically, Yada specifically, there's a famous controversy, which is a massive topic for itself. I'm not getting into it, which is about that you don't gain text skills.
I mean, you don't have to learn the whole. You don't have to learn it a whole day. You can learn in 30 minutes.
Yeah. So again,
yeah. It's the same reason why we don't learn Chumash for 5 years, and we learn Mishnayos for 1 year, and we skip right to the Gemara and as they cook the sauce.
Yeah, it's what the point of what you're saying is obviously correct. If you could use Chidon as a curriculum, you can use it as a curriculum. You have to be careful how to use it. There's no good and bad. Everything is how to do it, how to use it. So, like you said, yeah, if you're having a full seder of Gemara and a full seder of Chumash b'fnim and a full seder of Mishnayos b'fnim, whatever, and then you also have Yados in the afternoon, fine, yeah, nachanami. Yados specifically is a touchy subject, so people get very triggered about Yados. Either they're extremely pro or they're extremely against.
Why? She asks why.
Why?
Why it's not good?
Why is it triggered discussion?
Why are people against it?
Yeah.
So there's mainly two tainas always that it cuts out the bifnim skills obviously, and that it's overstimulating with the graphics and the pictures and all that. So it makes the kids now it makes the Gemara boring because it's overstimulated with the graphics. Which I'm repeating. I'm not taking sides. I'm not expressing my own opinions here. But these are the famous two tainas against things. There's been literally tens of articles written, COL and Nash over the years, people bashing Chidon and then people responding with pro Chidon and then bashing Chidon, and this has all been covered. I can't hear you.
They have a mirror share where they attach the mitzvah of the day to a parak in the Aldus, talking about the mirror share. And right. So if you just learn the mitzvah, you get almost nothing. If you learn it in the Chidon book, you'll get everything. And and if you're talking about to know what Torah is saying, you'll know more in the Chidon than you sit a whole day learning Gemara. That I could tell you.
Correct.
You catch a whole day in 5 blot of Gemara, and you come in. You don't know if you're coming or going. And if you learn the Chidon every day,
you're sitting next
you go through all the mitzvahs are saying, you go through all the mitzvahs are saying, you do 1 year, 2 years, 3 years in a row, you walk out, kol kula.
Every single conversation about Chidon always boils to, when it comes to Mesivta, how do the boys do it? So you're sitting next to the Minal of the Mesivta, ask him. It's always the famous question. It's always the famous Taina Hin Tzurik. Do the kids who did Chidon, are they better set for Mesivta or worse set for Mesivta?
Well, the boys, you have the press? The boys, I could talk to him. The boys that he gets from all over the country, they don't have the proper skills. that he can
I'm
give
not
a
picking
share.
on him specifically. I'm
You're
saying
you're
it's funny
saying the reason
because
we don't learn the Yahadus is because we have to stress on the skills. And I'm
yeah,
telling
that's the
you,
time.
you're reverse engineering because when you learn Gemara, you reverse engineer. You don't have to. When you're in the Chidon, they show you how to look at something. You look at a mitzvah say, you mitzvah lo say. You look at
It's
he
true,
brings down,
100%. That
he
100%.
brings down the details of the halacha, and then he brings down further and further and
100%.
further.
They're
For
very clear in the Seder, 100%. And you should know that not only Yados, but all the, I even worked on one of their projects years ago. All their projects, it's living lessons, all living lessons projects. Their Sikhis, their Tanya, their Chumash, it all operates in the same rule. Everything is built up from the beginning to end. I was once working on a thing, we were doing Sikhis for them. So every Sikha had to have the same template. What's the pasuk in the Parsha? What's the question? What's the answer? How does the answer explain the pasuk? And what's the irah? Right? Like, yeah. So in that sense, they have this clarity and they put it into their curriculum. So putting together.
So what's missing?
What do you mean? What's missing?
Well, what's the negative of it? What's the negative?
No, there's no negative in that. And that
So
there's
why
no
is it
negative.
why is it in the curriculum in your school?
What the chidon?
Yeah.
First of all, chidon is a massive. It's a massive koch in our school. Mitzad chidon, mitzad tzivus Hashem, mitzad like meaning
You mean that's
extracurricular.
at home? But I'm saying why?
No, also in the school, the extracurricular. Like again, it's not taking the place of learning Mishnah. It's not taking the place of learning Gemara. It's not taking the place of learning Chumash. It's not taking the place of learning Halacha from the Sefer that we use for Halacha. If theoretically, if there was an extra hour that we needed to fill, and we were going to, again, a lot of schools do it, and I don't think anyone's against it to fill up an extra hour at the end of the day, which doesn't exist, right? After doing all the core subjects with text skills, at the end of the day, and again, this is where Mesiftas are the proof. The proof is in the pudding, where a bacher who's set with text skills is much more. Again, you want to change the whole yeshiva system, that it should be not based on text skills, it should be based on this, no problem. Then you have the solution. But if the yeshiva system is based on having text skills,
their phones these days, they visualize everything. Like what's the
no, again, no problem. That's a discussion for itself, and people are doing this also, trying to revolutionize the entire Shiva system. I'm not saying this sarcastically. I'm not saying this sardonically. I'm saying this seriously. There are people who are on a massive thing to revolutionize the yeshiva system, where Mesivtas should be a lot less learning Gemara and a lot less heavy text in Hachanami. So if that's the track and that's the goal, then you're right. Then Chidon will be an excellent place to put into fifth grade and fourth grade. But if you're talking about getting where Mesivta is heavy text based.
One second. Eli, the Rosh Hashiva wants to add something.
I remember when they started the Chidon, I remember the plan was that they wanted to do also Mishnayos. I remember I was talking to Gershon Eichhorn, and he was saying that this is just the beginning of the revolution, and we're going to change. Everything's going to be this way, because B'Poel Mamish, it's taking too long to get them used to the text and all these stuff. So these things are good. Like I vouch for these things. This Mishnayos I bought in yeshiva a long time ago was the best investment I made. A lot of Bachim started learning Masechtas this whole time, so I'm already used to this stuff.
Yeah.
So
my shver kochs in Rabbi Heller. Rabbi Heller's one of his famous vertlach is Art Scroll is the best mefeidish. That's his word.
But did you hear of them going further? Did you hear of the people of the Chidon, the Gershon Eichhorn, that they were planning to move, like to make curriculums? That was.
I never heard Mishnayos and Gemara. I do know about I'm saying they had the Chumash, they had the Tanya, they were working on Sichos. Not sure what happened to that. And not only that, they're actually working on a lot of halacha curriculums also, like even advanced halacha curriculums.
So it was when they started. He was talking to me because he helped out the
Mishnayos and Gemara. I never heard about. Mishnayos and Gemara. I never heard about.
Mishnayos was making the whole curriculum in the schools. Everything should be in this kind of life. That was whether they're making it, they're using another meisid which makes it. But that was the plan.
Right. Okay. So then it makes sense. Exactly.
It's not exactly like that. I have it in my house.
They have a chumash, Rabbi.
And how do you collaborate your whole drasha with the takana of Limud Rambam? It becomes Limud Rambam mitmol. Suddenly you're just learning all these things, and no one has all the background knowledge, and you have to have to be prakim a day. A regular person. Rambam is meant for everybody. Your whole thing.
One second. That's a separate question about, and for that to have the same Rambam Thursday night or whenever you're making it, you're asking how to learn Rambam properly and not sacrifice the learning for the Rambam, right? Like,
Based on the whole shit of how you're explaining, that's how I learn. That's how I always like to learn. I always all the thing in the whatever you're saying, like that's what I follow very much. When it comes to Rambam, I have a very difficult time. It just becomes impossible.
Obviously. For that, everyone has to figure it out themselves. I mean, some people will tell you don't do Shleisha Prakim until you went through the whole cycle, Perak Echad, and understand it.
There wasn't even a safer until Rambam Mavur that's coming out in Eretz Yisrael. That's maybe, that's already getting close to. Yeah, so that's getting close to art school. I had a talk with Willem that makes it. He told me he told all his workers, make sure you make my Rambam just like art school, not like Mesifta, not like do it like art school. That's the best. That's the best thing. I don't know if they were so much sliach, but without that, it's like it's like you're learning just Gemara. You have no idea. There's too many things that you need that you.
I mean, obviously, by definition, the Rambam did inherently. The Rambam did that. He works in a kala kaved. So officially, you're supposed to be able to, if you're spending the time when it gets to Hilchas Tumatara or whatever, when it gets to the harder halachas, if you learn the Rambam properly, then he builds up all the musagim you need to know. He spends the beginning, the first few prakim of any given hilchus, explaining.
Yeah, for me, it's still lacking a lot. Like
because you're learning 3 prakim a day, and you have to fly through it, and you don't have time.
I actually bought the art school Mishnayos and learned through most of the Shas just in order to understand the Rambam better. Like that's why I did it, because that explains every Mishnah so well. Instead of me learning the whole Shas to understand the Rambam, so that's why that was my kav. But other than that,
so you're saying that someone should make a Rambam like that, okay? So
I think Rambam Mavur is somewhat. I think that's the best thing out there now. They didn't finish it. They're in the middle.
By the way, Rabbi Shmuel, I just saw a verse from the Frierdiker Rebbe. They gave out a tape. They gave out a tape from the Frierdiker Rebbe. I don't know if you saw it. A tape just recently. I got it, and a tape we can barely understand but they have it. Subtitles. Yeah. So the Rebbe says there that his father, the Rebbe Shab, kept on asking him, "Was gedenkst du?" After you learned everything, "Was gedenkst du?" What do you remember? What do you remember? So when you
it came out a few years ago.
Okay, so when you learn Shlosh Prakim Rambam, I just ask you just spend 45 minutes or whatever you spend, and then you have to ask yourself, "Was gedenkst du?" Chai Kax Plavina, and therefore that's why I go back to the Yahadus, and if you read it there, you could say you remember something.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so we follow this custom. The Pirish Mishnayos, the I give a shir here also once a week. So we went through a lot of those in Yonim. I learned it years ago. I found it also very interesting. So I told them all about the Gadata, all about the Tzayirei Tachas, and all about the Nosei Miseichel Ishtoi L'Seichel Imoy. All the Lashinis we shared over here. We learned it beyond.
Yeah. It's very geschmack stuff over there.
All the Hagdamis are interesting, and also all the Igris. I think those things are like I learned it many times with all the like any type of mefarish that there is on it. Like it's very Yisaitis the Kinyanim. I used to learn it in Yeshiva. I used to teach it to Bachram as well. The Hagdama the Pirish Mishnayos in the Rambam is very, very powerful stuff.
Yeah, it's very long, and the Rambam gets sidetracked a lot with the whole nevuah. He goes the whole arifs about nevuah in the beginning.
But he gives you a mashal, when he explains he explains that Agadata, he explains what it really means, what's laying over here, and then he gives you a dum. He says just like I explained this Agadata, same thing goes. There's secrets in every single word the Chachamim say.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it's Yisraelic stuff. Also, like in Amunah, that.
But they're also encouraged that we should learn Hakdamis to the Gemara. Yeah, I think there were a kind that ever says that he asked the Shivas, how come you don't learn the Hakdamis to the Gemara?
I think it was Mishpatim Memhei.
Yeah, they even bogus answers that they're busy or something.
Yeah. I think it was Mishpatim Memhei. The Rebbe asked. The Rebbe said about Mavi Talmud. He said, when I was in yeshiva, cheder, whatever lashon reviews, they taught me that. I don't know why they don't do it now. It's the back of the Gemara. No, sorry, Fakert. Ever said that? No, he didn't learn it. That he only saw it when he saw once a brachas, and the back of brachas there was Mavi Talmud, and he didn't know what it was. Something like that. And Rebbe, was wondering why they don't teach it. Yeah. It's all the same. It's the same Vart, exactly.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And by the way, now
That's
Heshi
nice.
recently donated the whole Mishnah stuck at that Mishnah and the Gemara Art Scroll. So thank you, Heshi. Now there's no excuses. You gotta start the learning. Huh? Yeah. Okay, okay, Zai Gesund. Thank you very much.